Have you ever found yourself praying deeply, seeking God with all your heart, but feeling like your words are going nowhere? It seems like your prayers get lost in the air, without echo, without response, and you start to wonder, does God really hear me? Or are my words not reaching Him? This feeling of disconnection can be devastating. It's as if you're talking to a closed door, shouting into the void. But why does this happen? What lies behind this silence from God? Is it a failure on our part, or is something greater at play? What if God is listening to us all the time, but our expectations are blinding us? The truth is that we often rush to judge the lack of response as abandonment or indifference when, in reality, silence can be a profound form of answer. Have you stopped to think that sometimes God is teaching us to trust, to wait, to mature through this apparent emptiness? After all, are we really prepared to hear the answer we're asking for? It could be that the problem is not in God's silence but in how we approach Him. Have you ever considered that, even with the best intentions, we may be making mistakes that affect the effectiveness of our prayers? Imagine a radio tuned to the wrong station, full of noise that prevents the message from being clear. The same can happen in our communication with God. We pray, but we fail to tune in to the right frequency. What are these mistakes that can disconnect us? Perhaps sometimes we approach God automatically, without depth. Have you ever prayed out of habit, without really thinking about what you're saying? Or maybe we pray asking for things, but without truly believing we will receive them. Have our prayers become a wish list instead of a sincere conversation with the Creator? We might be asking with good intentions, yet still blocking the connection with God. Perhaps it's time to reflect. Are we praying the way God taught us? Or are we stuck in habits that drive us away instead of drawing us closer? Prayer is one of the most powerful tools we have at our disposal, a direct bridge between us and the Creator of the universe. Have you stopped to think about the privilege of being able to speak with God at any moment, anywhere? We don't need intermediaries or complicated rituals, we just need to turn to Him in prayer. But do we understand the true power that this practice carries? Are we using this tool effectively? The Bible provides clear examples of how to pray, and no one taught us better than Jesus. He showed us that prayer is not just a plea for help but an intimate dialogue with the Father. Remember the prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus, in His agony, poured out His heart before God? He taught us that we can be honest and vulnerable, that we can lay bare our anguish and fears, trusting that God hears us. But prayer also demands something from us, a willingness to listen and follow His will. So, why don't we make prayer a vital part of our daily lives? What holds us back from diving deeply into this connection? Perhaps it's time to rediscover the power of prayer, not as an obligation, but as an invitation to be in communion with the God who created us. Now, here's one of the most common mistakes we make when praying: the lack of fervor. Have you ever prayed mechanically, almost as if you were just fulfilling an obligation? Perhaps repeating words that come out automatically, without pausing to feel the weight of what you're saying? If so, don't worry. It happens to all of us. But the problem is that a prayer without fervor, without passion, loses its strength. How can we expect something extraordinary to happen if we pray in a lukewarm manner, without intensity? Think of someone who asks for something with conviction, with a heart full of expectation. That person is invested in that request, genuinely believing that the answer will come. That is fervor. This is the kind of prayer God expects from us. An effective prayer is filled with fervor, faith, and sincerity. It's not just about what we ask for, but how we ask for it. Have you thought about the last time you prayed with all your heart? With tears in your eyes, as if that prayer were your last resort, your last chance. Fervor is not about exaggerating emotionally, but about praying with deep and true faith. It is the prayer that comes from the soul, expressing absolute dependence on God. Have you felt that? Have you ever had a moment when, with so much fervor, you could barely find the words, yet you knew that God was hearing your cry? God cares about every detail of our lives, and He responds to those who pray with an open and passionate heart. Biblical examples of fervor show us the impact of intense and sincere prayer. Take the case of Hannah, the mother of Samuel. She prayed with such depth and passion in the temple that the priest Eli thought she was drunk. Can you imagine? What seemed to human eyes to be uncontrolled behavior was, in fact, a heart in despair, crying out to God for a miracle. Hannah wasn't just asking, she was pouring out her soul before God, with unwavering faith that He could turn her pain into joy. And the result? God heard her prayer and gave her the son she so desired. And who can forget Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane? This is the ultimate example of fervor in prayer. In a moment of deep agony, knowing what was to come, Jesus prayed so intensely that His sweat became like drops of blood. He knew the weight of the mission He was about to fulfill, and yet He surrendered to God's will. Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. Is there any greater fervor than that? It was not just a desperate prayer but one of complete submission, a fervor that encompassed both the humanity of Jesus and His absolute trust in the divine plan. These examples show us that fervent prayer moves the heart of God. It's not just about the words we use, but about the intensity of our faith and commitment. When we pray like Hannah, like Jesus, with everything we have, our prayers gain a new dimension. So, have you ever wondered, what would your prayer life look like if you prayed with that same intensity, with that deep and unwavering fervor? What could God accomplish through you if you prayed that way today? But after all, what is fervor? Often, we confuse fervor with emotional exaggeration when, in fact, it's not about how we feel on the outside, but what is happening within us. Fervor is much more than tears or eloquent words. It's that internal flame, a solid and unwavering confidence that God is listening, that He cares, and that He will act in due time. Praying with fervor is like setting aside the rush of daily life, stopping, and truly connecting with heaven. It's that moment when your mind is focused, your heart is open, and your words carry the weight of a living faith. It doesn't matter if you speak loudly or in silence, if you're on your knees or walking. What matters is that you are completely present, with your heart laid bare before God. Have you ever experienced this kind of prayer? A prayer that feels like it's burning inside you, not out of despair, but out of conviction. Fervor is praying with the certainty that, even if you don't see the answer immediately, God is working behind the scenes. It's the seriousness of someone who knows they are not just speaking to the wind, but directly to the Creator of the universe. This intensity doesn't stem from fleeting emotion but from solid faith, from deep dependence on God. Imagine praying like this every day, with renewed confidence. Wouldn't it be amazing to see your life transformed by the way you approach God? Fervor is what transforms a common prayer into a prayer that moves mountains. And you, are you willing to pray with that intensity, to put all your faith into action, trusting that God is hearing every word, every sigh of yours? Another mistake that distances us from effective prayer is the lack of faith. Faith is the foundation upon which all our prayers must stand. Without it, prayer becomes just an empty conversation, directionless, and without impact. But with faith, even the simplest words have the power to move the heart of God. Remember the Canaanite woman? She had no right, culturally speaking, to approach Jesus, but her unwavering faith broke down all barriers. She persisted, even being initially rejected, crying out for her daughter's healing with a confidence that defied the impossible. And what happened? Jesus, moved by that woman's faith, granted her request and healed her daughter. This is the power of faith in action. Faith opens doors that seem closed, changes realities that appear immutable. But are we praying with this kind of faith? Or are our prayers often filled with doubts and uncertainties, like someone tossing a coin into the wind, hoping something will happen? The prayer that pleases God is one filled with conviction, a certainty that He can and will act according to His will. And it's not about having perfect faith. God does not require us to have flawless faith, but rather a faith that endures even in the face of difficulties. Like the Canaanite woman, our faith should be persistent, courageous, unafraid to cry out until God responds. The question is, do you truly believe that God is listening to your prayer? Do you believe that He is capable of making the impossible happen in your life? If the answer is yes, then this is the faith that transforms, that moves the heart of God, and that brings results beyond our imagination. Now, imagine if all your prayers were made with this kind of faith, not a blind faith, but a living and vibrant trust that remains steadfast even when circumstances are contrary. How would this change your prayer life? How would it change you? Faith and expectation go hand in hand. Praying with faith is not just believing that God hears, but also expecting that He will act, even if the answer is not immediate. Have you ever prayed expecting something, but deep down, you weren't sure that God would actually do it? This is the point. Expectation fuels faith, and it is what keeps us steady as we wait. It's not enough just to ask God, we need to actively wait, with the conviction that, in His perfect timing, He will act. Remember Abraham? God promised him that he would be the father of many nations, but the years went by, and reality seemed increasingly impossible. However, Abraham maintained his faith. He didn't just believe in God's promise, he lived in expectation of it, even when all signs pointed in the opposite direction. This patient expectation is what strengthens our faith and sustains us during times of waiting. God's silence in those moments is not a no, but an invitation to trust even more. This is where we often fail. We want quick answers, immediate solutions. And when they don't come in the time we think is right, we begin to doubt. But Isaiah 40 verse 31 reminds us, "But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength, they shall mount up with wings like eagles, they shall run and not be weary, they shall walk and not faint." Waiting on God is a time of renewal, not despair. Waiting on God is like a child waiting for a promised gift. They do not question whether the gift will come, they simply know that the right moment will arrive. Likewise, when we pray, we must have this confidence. No matter how long it takes, we need to keep our expectation alive. And what if the answer we are waiting for is not what we imagined? God knows what is best for us. Trusting His answer, whatever it may be, is the true test of faith. So, have you been praying with expectation? Or are you letting doubt erode your confidence? Remember, God is faithful. And if He has promised, He will fulfill it. The question is, are we willing to wait for the right time, with hearts full of faith and expectation? Patience in prayer is often the greatest challenge we face. Praying and not seeing an immediate answer can be frustrating. It is precisely during this waiting period that our faith is tested and strengthened. Many times, the delay in hearing God's answer does not mean He is ignoring us, but rather that He is working on something greater within us. Isaiah 40 verse 31 offers us a powerful promise, "But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength." Waiting on God is an essential part of the spiritual journey, a process that not only brings answers but also transforms who we are. But why is it so hard to wait? Perhaps because we live in an age of immediacy, where everything is at our fingertips with a click, and we expect God to operate in the same way. However, God does not work on our timeline, but on His perfect timing. Have you ever stopped to think that during the wait, God is preparing not just the answer, but also your heart to receive it? Patience in prayer is not just a virtue, it is a tool that brings us closer to God. It is in this waiting time that we learn to truly trust, to rest in the fact that even when everything seems still, God is at work. He is refining our faith, strengthening our character, and teaching us to depend on Him, not just for blessings, but for His very presence in our lives. When we pray and wait patiently, we allow God to act at the right time, guiding us according to His plans and not our own. The question is, are we willing to give Him total control? Or do we grow impatient, trying to force an answer? Waiting is often a gift in disguise. And while we wait, we can trust the promise that, "Those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength." They not only survive the wait, they thrive in it, running without becoming weary, walking without fainting. So, the next time you pray and do not receive an immediate answer, ask yourself, how can I use this waiting moment to grow spiritually? How can I learn to rest in God, knowing that He is in control? Action and obedience must accompany our faith. Many times, we pray asking God to help us, to guide us, but are we ready to act when He responds? Faith is not just a passive belief, it is an invitation to action. James 2 verse 17 reminds us, "Faith without works is dead." This means that for our faith to be alive, it needs to manifest in our actions. Imagine you are waiting for a job opportunity. You pray fervently, asking God to open doors. But are you also sending out resumes? Are you preparing for interviews? Prayer and action go hand in hand. When we ask God for something, He often gives us a step to take, a direction to follow. And our responsibility is to be attentive and ready to act. Let's look at the story of Peter. He was in a boat during a storm, and when he saw Jesus walking on the water, he called Peter to come to him. Peter had to get out of the boat. Faith made him walk on the water, but it was action that brought him to Jesus. He couldn't just pray for safety and remain still. He needed to take the step, even if it meant leaving his comfort zone. Obedience is the practical response to what God asks of us. Sometimes, it can feel daunting. We may feel fear or uncertainty, but it is in that moment that we need to trust that God is with us, that He empowers us to do what He has called us to do. Our faith is strengthened when we move toward what God has revealed to us. So, how are you reacting to the answers God has been giving to your prayers? Are you listening for His voice and preparing to act? Remember, action is a reflection of faith. Don't wait for everything to be perfect to take the first step. Sometimes, action requires courage and a willingness to move forward, even when we can't see the way ahead. And when you act, you will not only be seeking answers but also becoming an instrument through which God can work and fulfill His purposes. Finally, we need to address one of the most subtle challenges in our prayer life, the mistake of not increasing our faith. We have all faced moments of doubt when we feel discouraged or even unable to believe that God can act in our lives. And that's natural, but the real question is, what do we do when that unbelief arises? In Mark 9 verse 24, we find the beautiful prayer of the Father who cried out to Jesus, "I believe. Help my unbelief." This is a plea that many of us need to make, acknowledging our limitations and inviting God to increase our faith. God does not expect us to have perfect or unshakable faith, but He desires us to be honest in our struggle. When we ask for help, we are admitting that we need Him to sustain our faith. This act of humility is what allows God to work in us, shaping our unbelief into something stronger. True prayer is the one that surrenders to God's grace, allowing Him to do what we cannot do on our own. Imagine how your life would change if you asked God to increase your faith every day. You would become more confident in your prayers, more willing to act, and more open to receiving His promises. As your faith grows, your doubts diminish. And when you begin to see God answering your prayers, it becomes a cycle of increasing faith that propels you to trust Him even more. So, I encourage you to make this prayer every day: "Lord, I believe in you, but help my unbelief." Let this phrase resonate in your heart and transform your prayer life. And as you do this, remember that you are not alone on this journey. Together, we can grow in faith, hope, and love. If you enjoyed this content and want to delve deeper into this theme, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Your participation is very important and helps us continue sharing messages that can touch lives. May God bless your faith journey.